My name is Charlotte. I'm 31 years old, and I never imagined that trusting my husband's family enough to let them stay under our roof would end with someone reaching into my own purse at 3 in the morning. It happened on an ordinary Friday night. Nothing unusual about it at first. Just my husband Ryan's younger sister Natalie visiting for the weekend, staying in our guest room like she often did. We'd had dinner together earlier that evening. Pasta and wine, easy conversation flowing around the table, Natalie laughing at something Ryan said, everything feeling completely normal and comfortable. I remember washing dishes afterward while Ryan and Natalie watched a movie in the living room, the sound of their laughter drifting faintly into the kitchen as I finished cleaning up for the night. Around 11, I said goodnight, heading upstairs to bed, exhausted after a long week at work, looking forward to finally getting some rest after days of back-to-back meetings and deadlines. Ryan joined me shortly after, and we talked quietly for a few minutes before drifting off to sleep, my purse sitting on the dresser across the room the way it always did every single night. I didn't think twice about it. Natalie had stayed with us plenty of times before, and I'd never once worried about leaving my things out, trusting her completely as part of our extended family. I fell asleep quickly that night, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that comes after an exhausting week, completely unaware of anything unusual happening anywhere in our quiet house around us. At some point during the night, though I had no idea at the time, the guest room door must have opened quietly, footsteps moving carefully down the hallway toward our bedroom in the darkness. I never heard anything. No creaking floorboards, no rustling fabric, nothing that might have woken me from the deep sleep I'd fallen into after such an exhausting, demanding week at the office. I later learned it happened around 3 in the morning, a time when the entire house should have been peacefully silent, everyone supposedly resting soundly behind closed bedroom doors. Natalie must have slipped into our room carefully, moving toward my purse on the dresser, her hands searching quietly through it while Ryan and I slept just a few feet away, completely unaware. She found my wallet easily enough, tucked into the same interior pocket where I always kept it, my credit card sitting there among a handful of receipts and old grocery store loyalty cards. I don't know how long she stood there in our dark bedroom, whether her hands trembled at all, whether any hesitation crossed her mind before she made the decision to take what wasn't hers. Whatever happened in those quiet, dark minutes, she took my card silently, slipping back out of our bedroom just as carefully as she'd entered, leaving no trace behind for either of us to notice. I woke up naturally around 6 that morning, sunlight just beginning to filter through our curtains, completely unaware that anything unusual had happened while I'd been sleeping so peacefully. I stretched, glancing over at Ryan still sleeping soundly beside me, smiling slightly at how peaceful he looked, grateful for another quiet morning before the busyness of the day ahead began. I got up quietly, careful not to wake him, heading downstairs to start the coffee maker, my mind already drifting toward the mental list of tasks waiting for me throughout that Saturday. I noticed Natalie's bedroom door was still closed as I passed the guest room, assuming she was still asleep, nothing seeming unusual or out of place as I continued my normal morning routine. I made coffee, poured myself a cup, and sat down at the kitchen table with my phone, scrolling briefly through emails before deciding to check my banking app, a habit I kept up most mornings. I expected to see the usual, my paycheck deposit, a few small recurring charges, nothing particularly noteworthy about an ordinary Saturday morning banking check like I performed almost daily. Instead, my eyes landed on something that made my stomach drop instantly. A charge I didn't recognize at all, the number attached to it far larger than anything I'd normally see on my statement. I stared at the screen, certain for a moment that I was misreading the number, blinking hard and looking again, though the charge remained exactly the same, impossible to explain away. $9,000 charged at something called Wexford Fine Jewelers, a store I'd never heard of, time-stamped at 3:47 in the morning, hours before I'd even woken up that day. My hands started trembling slightly as I set my coffee mug down, my mind racing through every possible explanation, though nothing reasonable came to mind for a charge this large at that hour. I hadn't made any purchase. I hadn't even left the house the night before. My card should have been sitting safely in my purse the entire time, exactly where I always kept it overnight. I opened the transaction details further, my heart pounding now, searching for any additional information that might explain what I was looking at on my phone screen that quiet morning. The charge was confirmed, processed, and completed. No pending status, no error message, nothing suggesting this was some kind of banking glitch or temporary hold I could simply dismiss. I stood up quickly from the kitchen table, my coffee forgotten, walking upstairs with my phone still gripped tightly in my hand, needing to wake Ryan immediately to show him what I'd found. "Ryan," I said, shaking his shoulder gently, my voice tighter than I intended. He stirred slowly, blinking up at me with sleepy confusion evident across his tired, unsuspecting face. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting up slightly, noticing immediately the panic clearly written across my expression, despite my attempts to stay calm while explaining the situation to him. "Someone charged $9,000 to my card last night," I said, holding my phone out toward him. "At 3 a.m. I have no idea what this charge even is." He took the phone from me, his own confusion deepening as he studied the screen carefully, scrolling through the transaction details himself, clearly trying to make sense of it just like I had. "This doesn't make sense," he said, rubbing his eyes. "You were asleep the whole night. I was right here beside you. Neither of us left the house at all after we went to bed." "I know," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "That's what's scaring me. If neither of us made this charge, then someone else had access to my card while we were both sleeping upstairs." We sat there in silence for a moment, both of us processing the implications of what that actually meant, the quiet unease building steadily between us in our otherwise peaceful bedroom. "Wait," Ryan said suddenly, his expression shifting. "Natalie stayed over last night. She's still here, sleeping down the hall." The realization hit us both at exactly the same moment. I felt my stomach twist uncomfortably at the thought, immediately wanting to dismiss it, refusing to believe that Ryan's own sister could have done something like this while staying under our roof. "It's probably nothing," I said quickly, though my voice lacked full conviction even as I said it. "Maybe it's some kind of fraud. Maybe someone stole my card information online." Ryan nodded slowly, though I could see uncertainty flickering behind his eyes too, neither of us fully able to dismiss the timing of Natalie's visit coinciding so closely with this unexplained charge. "Let's call the store first," he said, reaching for his own phone. "Maybe they can tell us more about who actually made the purchase, and we can rule things out from there properly." I nodded, though my hands were still shaking slightly as I searched for the jewelry store's contact information online, needing answers before my mind spiraled further into uncomfortable suspicion. I found the store's number quickly, my thumb hovering over the call button, some part of me hoping desperately that this would turn out to be a simple, easily explainable mistake instead. Ryan sat beside me, his expression tense, both of us bracing ourselves for whatever explanation waited on the other end of that call, neither of us quite ready yet for what we might actually learn. I glanced toward the hallway briefly, toward the closed guest room door where Natalie was still presumably sleeping, an uncomfortable knot forming tightly in my stomach as I dialed the number. The phone began ringing, each tone stretching out uncomfortably long, my heart pounding steadily as I waited for someone at Wexford Fine Jewelers to finally answer and explain everything to us. A woman's voice finally answered, cheerful and professional, completely unaware of the tension building on our end of the line as I explained why I was calling that morning. "I'm looking into a charge made on my card last night," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "Around 3:47 a.m., I need to know exactly what was purchased and who made it." She asked me to hold for a moment while she pulled up the transaction, the silence stretching uncomfortably as Ryan and I sat close together, both of us straining to hear anything through the phone. "I see it here," she said finally. "A diamond bracelet, purchased in person. Store policy requires photo ID for purchases over $5,000, so I do have some details on file." My heart pounded as I asked her to describe the buyer, bracing myself for an answer I already feared, some part of me still hoping desperately for a stranger, a random thief, anyone else entirely. "Let me check," she said, papers rustling faintly on her end. Female, mid-20s, blonde hair, wearing a green jacket. She used a card matching this account, along with a matching ID. I felt the room tilt slightly at her description, my stomach dropping as every detail lined up perfectly with Natalie, the green jacket especially, one I recognized immediately as hers. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice barely steady, ending the call quickly before I lost my composure completely in front of the woman still cheerfully waiting on the other end. I set the phone down slowly, looking at Ryan, watching the same devastating realization settle across his face as it had just settled across mine moments earlier in our quiet bedroom. "It's her," I said quietly. "Green jacket, blonde hair, mid-20s. Ryan, that's Natalie. There's no other explanation that fits this description as perfectly as she does right now." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to process what I was telling him, torn between disbelief and the mounting evidence that pointed so directly toward his own sister's involvement. "Maybe there's an explanation," he said, though his voice lacked real conviction now, grasping for some alternative that might soften the reality slowly settling heavily over both of us. "Let's go ask her," I said firmly, standing up from the bed. "I'd rather hear it directly from her than keep guessing and hoping for some explanation that probably doesn't exist." We dressed quickly, moving with a strange, tense energy, both of us avoiding the guest room entirely, deciding instead to drive to Natalie's own apartment across town for this conversation. I remembered then that she'd left our house early that morning, mentioning something vague about errands before we'd even woken up, a detail that suddenly felt far more significant now. The drive to her apartment felt unbearably long, neither of us speaking much, my hands trembling slightly in my lap as I stared out the window, replaying every detail of the past hour repeatedly. Ryan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles whitening slightly, clearly struggling internally with loyalty toward his sister colliding directly against the evidence mounting steadily against her. "I don't want to believe this," he finally said, breaking the tense silence between us. "But I don't know how else to explain everything lining up this perfectly against her right now." I reached over and squeezed his hand gently, understanding the difficult position he was in, caught between protecting me and confronting uncomfortable truths about someone he loved deeply. We pulled into her apartment complex minutes later, my heart pounding steadily as we parked and walked toward her building, both of us bracing ourselves for whatever conversation awaited us inside. I thought about the diamond bracelet, wondering what it looked like, wondering if she was wearing it right now, completely unaware that we already knew enough to confront her directly. Ryan knocked firmly on her apartment door, both of us standing there in tense silence, waiting for any sound of movement from inside. Uncertain exactly what reaction we should expect from her, we heard footsteps approaching slowly from the other side, my stomach twisting anxiously as the lock clicked, the door beginning to open slowly to reveal whatever waited for us on the other side. The door swung open slowly, and Natalie stood there in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled back messily, clearly not expecting visitors this early on a Saturday morning. My eyes immediately went to her wrist, where a brand new diamond bracelet caught the light, sparkling unmistakably against her skin, exactly the kind of purchase that would cost thousands of dollars. Behind her, hanging on a hook near the entryway, I spotted the green jacket the store clerk had described, the same distinctive shade, the same style I'd seen Natalie wear dozens of times before. Her expression shifted the moment she saw us standing there, surprise flickering quickly into something else entirely, something that looked uncomfortably close to guilt crossing her face. "Ryan? Charlotte?" she said, her voice slightly too bright, too casual, the kind of forced cheerfulness people use when they're trying desperately to mask something they don't want discovered. "Can we come in?" Ryan asked, his voice tight, controlled in a way I rarely heard from him, clearly trying to hold himself together despite the storm of emotions building visibly beneath the surface. She hesitated for just a moment, her eyes flickering briefly toward her own wrist, seeming to notice the bracelet herself, as if suddenly remembering it was still there for us to see clearly. "Sure," she said, stepping aside to let us into her apartment, though her movements felt stiff now, guarded, nothing like the easy, comfortable niece-in-law energy I usually associated with her. We walked into her living room, and I couldn't stop staring at that bracelet, the diamonds catching the morning light streaming through her window, each sparkle feeling like confirmation of everything. "Natalie," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "where did you get that bracelet?" I watched her face carefully, needing to see her reaction before she had time to fully compose herself. She glanced down at her wrist, her fingers instinctively covering it slightly, as if she could somehow hide something already in plain sight for both of us to clearly see right in front of us. "I bought it," she said quietly, her voice much smaller now than the falsely bright greeting she'd offered moments earlier at her front door when she hadn't expected this confrontation. "With what money?" Ryan asked, his voice cracking slightly, the question landing heavily between all three of us in that quiet apartment living room filled with morning sunlight. Natalie's composure finally cracked completely, her shoulders slumping, the forced cheerfulness draining away entirely as she seemed to understand there was no point continuing to pretend anymore. "I can explain," she said quickly, her eyes darting between the two of us, clearly searching for some way to frame what she'd done that might sound less serious than it actually was. "Then explain," I said firmly, crossing my arms, refusing to let her deflect or soften what had happened while I slept peacefully upstairs, completely unaware of what was happening downstairs. She took a shaky breath, sitting down slowly on her couch, the diamond bracelet still catching the light every time she moved her wrist, an unavoidable reminder of exactly what she'd done. "I took your card," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Last night, while you were both asleep. I know how bad this sounds, but I promise I had a reason." "You went through my purse while I was sleeping," I said, my voice shaking now, disbelief and hurt tangling together painfully as the reality of her admission settled fully over me. She nodded slowly, tears beginning to well up in her eyes, though I found myself unable to feel much sympathy yet, still processing the full weight of what she'd actually done to us. "I was going to pay you back," she said quickly, panic creeping steadily into her voice now. "I needed it for an emergency, and I knew you wouldn't say yes if I asked you directly." Ryan stood frozen beside me, clearly torn between the sister he'd grown up protecting and the wife standing beside him, still processing this violation that had happened in our own bedroom. "An emergency doesn't look like a diamond bracelet, Natalie," I said, my voice shaking with anger now, unable to hold back the disbelief building steadily inside me since we'd arrived. She flinched slightly at my words, glancing down at the bracelet again, as if seeing it clearly for the first time through my eyes instead of whatever justification she'd built for herself overnight. "I know how it looks," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "But I've been struggling financially for months, and I saw this piece, and I just wanted something nice for once in my life." "That's not an emergency," I said sharply. "An emergency is rent, medical bills, something urgent. This," I gestured toward her wrist, "this is theft dressed up as desperation, Natalie." Ryan stood frozen beside me, his jaw tight, clearly torn between defending me and protecting the sister he'd spent his entire life looking out for, since they were children growing up together. "Ryan," Natalie said, turning toward him, her voice pleading now. "You know I wouldn't normally do something like this. I panicked. I wasn't thinking clearly when I took the card." "You went into our bedroom at 3 a.m, Ryan said slowly, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "While we were sleeping? That's not panic, Natalie. That's planning." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, seeming to realize there was no version of this story that made her actions sound less calculated than they actually had been. "I'll return it," she said finally, her voice small. "I'll take the bracelet back today, get a refund, pay you back every penny. Please, just don't make this bigger than it needs to be." I felt something harden inside me at her words, the casual assumption that returning the bracelet would simply erase what she'd done, that this could all be quietly smoothed over between us. "This isn't just about the money," I said firmly. "You went through my personal belongings. You took something from me while I was vulnerable and asleep in my own home. That's a violation." Natalie's tears fell more freely now, though I found myself unable to soften completely, still feeling the lingering unease of knowing someone had stood over me in the dark without my knowledge. "Please," she said, looking between Ryan and me desperately. "I'm begging you. I made a huge mistake, but please don't let this destroy our family over one bad decision I deeply regret." I looked at Ryan, watching him struggle visibly, torn between loyalty and the reality of what his sister had actually done to me, to us, inside the home we'd built together as a married couple. "I need a minute," I said quietly, stepping back slightly, needing space to think clearly before making a decision that would inevitably change the dynamic of our entire family moving forward. Ryan nodded, though he didn't follow me, staying instead with Natalie, the two of them ex. Continuity note: this is the final part of the story. My expanded Part 5 got cut off mid-sentence. I'll continue that thought here, covering the decision to call the police and filing the report, matching the original Part 10 ending. I decided next would define not just this moment, but how much respect I demanded going forward, both from Natalie and from the family I'd married into 3 years earlier. I thought about waking up that morning, completely unaware, trusting the people sleeping under my own roof, only to discover someone had violated that trust while I lay defenseless beside my husband. I thought about the diamond bracelet catching the light on her wrist, the casual way she'd assumed a simple apology and refund might smooth everything over as if nothing serious had happened. I turned back toward the living room, my decision settling firmly into place, the shakiness in my hands from earlier now replaced by something steadier, more resolute than I'd felt all morning. "I'm calling the police," I said firmly, pulling out my phone and unlocking the screen, watching Natalie's face drain of color instantly as the reality of my words fully registered with her. "Please don't, Charlotte," she said, panic flooding her voice completely now. "I'll return it, I swear. Don't ruin my life over this. I made a mistake, but I'm still family, please." "You made a choice," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion still churning beneath the surface. "Family doesn't go through someone's purse at 3 a.m. while they're sleeping." Ryan stepped closer, his expression pained, caught between two people he loved deeply, though I could see something shifting in his eyes, understanding slowly settling over his conflicted features. "Charlotte," he said quietly, though he didn't ask me to stop, seeming to recognize that this decision was mine alone to make, regardless of how difficult it clearly was for him personally. Natalie turned toward him desperately. "Ryan, please, talk to her. Tell her this doesn't need to go this far. We're family. Families work things out without involving the police." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight, before finally speaking. "You violated Charlotte's trust and safety in our own home, Nat. I love you, but I can't ask her to just forgive that." I dialed the non-emergency police line, my hands finally steady, Natalie's protests fading into background noise as I explained the situation clearly to the officer who answered my call. We waited together in tense silence for the police to arrive, Natalie sitting quietly on her couch now, tears streaming silently down her face, the bracelet still catching the light with every small movement. When the officers arrived, I explained everything clearly and calmly. The timeline, the charge, the store's description matching Natalie exactly. The bracelet still visible on her wrist as evidence. Natalie didn't deny anything when questioned directly, her earlier panic settling into resigned acceptance as she confirmed everything I'd already explained to the responding officers that afternoon. I filed the official police report that same afternoon, watching as an officer carefully documented every detail, understanding fully now that some boundaries couldn't simply be smoothed over quietly. Ryan stood beside me throughout the entire process, quiet but supportive, his loyalty finally landing where it needed to, even as guilt over his sister's actions remained etched clearly across his face. Later that evening, sitting together in our own living room, Ryan reached for my hand gently, neither of us speaking for a long moment, the weight of everything settling heavily between us. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I should have believed something was wrong the moment I saw that charge instead of hoping there was some innocent explanation for what had happened." I squeezed his hand gently, appreciating his honesty, though I knew rebuilding trust within his family would take considerably longer than one difficult conversation and one filed police report could accomplish.